Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Law and Legitimacy. It's a wonderful, wacky Wednesday wherever you are. I'm here in Connecticut. Mike is trapped in North Carolina, aspiring to be free. Well,
I do have a funny joke for North Carolina today. So the NC State did get a bowl. We did submit our bid to a bowl game. Anybody care to venture a guess? You got anything, Norm?
Oh, I don't know. The hickory stick, slap your mama upside the head, give me some more cone pone bowl, you know?
That would be more on brand. We're going to the Pop-Tarts Bowl.
Oh, gee. Oh, great. Well, I wish you some sugar frosted fun, you know? Where is the Pop-Tarts Bowl being played this year?
Orlando at Camping World Stadium against Kansas State. It's going to be I don't know. I don't know what to say. My son calls Pop-Tarts Bob Darts, and so I'm just going to go with the Bob Darts Bowl down in Orlando.
Yeah, well, hey, good. A bowl game is a bowl game. I'm glad to see the kids play. I'm still startled and grieving for the Seminoles, although not crying too hard about it. I much would rather have the Wolverines play them, but I think the bowl, the college football playoff series will be good this year. But the Grudge Bowl, pitting Georgia against Florida State, that will be a game to watch because two teams will come out with a chip on their shoulder, and only one of them is going to score 68 points, and that isn't the Seminoles.
Yeah, well, I threatened to go on a rant yesterday afternoon about the Seminoles, and I still feel like the college football playoff committee, you guys are abhorrent. In what world? It's 2023, and the only an undefeated team from the Power 5 conference, the Florida State Seminoles, from a program as robust and as storied and pedigreed as that, beats everybody on their schedule, and doesn't make it say that out loud without context, and just say, I don't care about the quarterback thing, Norm. Because what is the saying about football?
Yeah, but you just gave the argument away. It's without context. I mean, do you really believe that even with their quarterback,
it doesn't matter what I believe is going to happen. They still have to play.
Do you believe they're a better team than Alabama's Crimson Tide? Answer my question, please. Are you running for president of Harvard University such that you can't answer a simple yes or no question? Do you think that the Seminoles can beat the Crimson Tide?
Not without context. Yeah, it doesn't. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Mr. Bobblehead Doll, this calls for a yes or no question. And folks, we are setting you up for the next piece. Can you answer yes or no, Mr. Boyer? Can the Seminoles beat? Do you think the Seminoles are a better team than the Crimson Tide? Yes or no? That's my answer, folks. So let's move on to another display of inability to answer a question and conceding the point with sub silencio, that is, by way of silence. We're talking about Harvard's president, Claudine Gay. Now, somebody, blah, 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 angry dog. How about arf, 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 arf?
It's full tide over there. But look, you can't. You can feel however you want to feel about it.
It's not a question of feeling, it's a question of thinking. I'm not consulting your gut. I'm trying to talk to your head, but your gut's getting in the way. You know as well as I do that head-to-head, the Crimson Tide is a superior football team. They're better than the Seminoles.
Head-to-head between Texas and Alabama, Norm. Who's the superior team?
They're both in the playoffs. They're both in the playoffs.
We've already seen that game this year, haven't we?
They're both. That's the different question.
Have we not seen that game already?
They lost that game. And did the Seminoles play any of the team in the top four? No. And so, we've got a one-loss team over an undefeated team.
All I'm saying is that Michigan better stomp a mud hole in Alabama, or Washington better just take this thing lying down, because I'm sick of seeing teams like Washington and Oregon and Baylor get into the playoffs. They don't belong there.
Washington looks good this year. Michigan looks, we'll find out. It's going to be a great playoff season. But I'd rather spend my holiday season watching the playoffs than writing tuition checks or attending Harvard University. We're going to show you a clip of the president of one of the world's leading scholarly institutions who basically can't answer a yes or no question posed by a congressman. Elise, what's Elise's last name? Stefanik out of rural Buffalo. or rural New York, rather. I wondered whether Stefanik had training as a lawyer because it was a decent cross-examination, but she didn't know how to move in for the kill. In congressional hearings, as we've talked here before, congressmen get 5 minutes to ask questions, and they have to make a judicious use of their 5 minutes because the persons they are questioning have usually been well coached to avoid answering a question. What we have here is Representative Stefanik trying to get a straight answer out of Harvard President Claudine Gay about whether hate speech is tolerated on Harvard's campus. Mike, hit the play button so we can watch this in action.
Yes, sir.
Our commitment to
It's a
free
yes or no
speech-
question. Is that corrected? Is that okay for students to call for the mass murder of African Americans at Harvard? Is that protected free speech?
Our commitment to free
It's a
speech.
yes or no question.
I'm president of Harvard. I don't
Let me
have
ask
to
you
answer.
this. You are president of Harvard, so I assume you're familiar with the term
You're
intifada,
not.
correct?
Oh, I think I might
I've
have
heard
of
that term, yes.
And you understand that the use of the term intifada in the context of the Israeli-Arab conflict is indeed a call for violent armed resistance against the state of Israel, including violence against civilians and the genocide of Jews. Are you aware of
Well,
that?
I'm aware that some people take that as
That
a
type of hateful
viewpoint.
speech is personally abhorrent to me.
And
Wait
there
a
have been multiple marches at Harvard with students chanting, quote, "There is only one solution, intifada revolution," and, quote, "globalize the intifada." Is that correct?
I've heard that thoughtless, reckless, and hateful language on our campus. Yes.
So based
I
upon
heard it after you took the toothbrush out of your mouth when you're looking in the mirror in the morning, President Gay. Please, I'm sorry.
This is effectively how the whole 5 minutes goes, and I don't know how much more you want to play, and not sure it makes for great live streaming. But what we've got, and for the audio only listeners, this is a congressional hearing, and you're hearing Representative Elise Stefanik from the New York's 21st congressional district, asking, examining, I guess, Harvard's President Claudine Gay about the rise in calls for violence against Jewish members of the Harvard community and more on campus. And the basis of the question is essentially, is Harvard upholding its student code of conduct, its conduct policy on campus, in that calls for violence against groups of people are prima facie violative of the student conduct policy. And therefore, if the university is aware that these things are happening not in isolation, but in an ongoing and patterned manner, is that speech protected by the student code of conduct, or is it violative of the student code of conduct vis-a-vis harassment? And
so, Professor or President Gay, defended on grounds of classic free speech grounds. We defend the right of people to engage in even abhorrent speech, but we protect people against the consequences of acting on that speech. In other words, there's a difference between speech and conduct. And so if the conduct isn't speech, in other words, it's mere expression of an opinion, it's protected. And so that was the power of the representative asking about calling for, let's bring back the noose, trying to bring back lynching. What would happen if a white student on Harvard stood at Harvard Square and said, "It's time for Christmas, cook the goose, find a black person, bring me a noose." I think at that point, Harvard might have something to say, that hateful speech might be perceived as threatening to members of the Harvard community. It's certainly as repugnant as calling for the extermination of Jews. But one gets the sense that if those words were uttered by a white person against a black person at Harvard, that white person might find himself out the door. Whereas if you're praising the intifada, suddenly this is an expression of mere speech that doesn't result in conduct. And if you've got a policy that prohibits harassment and intimidation in the form of speech, you're saying that speech can have a physical quality. Speech is more than the mere utterance of an opinion. It can have an impact, a concrete impact on another person by making them feel unsafe. I think that President Gay did not acquit herself well in the congressional hearing, and Representative Stefanik is among those who for whatever reasons, is calling for the resignation of the president, saying that she's unfit to lead the institution. Now, Stefanik is an alum of Harvard. I think she graduated in 2006, if I recall the details from her biography. So I guess she has some standing to raise that claim. I don't think as a member of Congress she has any right, or that her opinion about whether the President Gay should lead the institution is of any moment. But I do think that President Gay and Harvard look the worse for the wear in this confrontation.
Well, and if I may, because I want to back up a little bit, because I think T-Girl, you raised the point that I wanted to get to about the double standards, and I think that what troubled me in listening to this is multifold. One, President Gay appears to be without credibility at all. Everything is pre-rehearsed. She's been prepared with these stock answers to say, these things are personally abhorrent to me, or we cultivate an environment of, free expression and blah, 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 blah. So that's one thing. It's just totally, it's just a body without a soul in this hearing, right? And it's more about mitigating potential liability to the university, mitigating any sort of negative press to be generated, which great job, President Gay, with doing that. But the other thing about this is that I'm reminded of Mark Randazza, who's appeared on this show several times. And in one of those particular shows, Norm, I think in one of the long form interviews, you may recall that Mark said something to the effect of, he's a First Amendment attorney, and he said that, free speech is a complicated issue. The First Amendment is complicated. And of course, we know the origins of Randazza's life as a practitioner within the dirty movie industry, right? And his line is something to the effect of, someone's got to guard the dirtiest part of the wall. The First Amendment is the dirtiest part of the wall. So this sort of informing that there is speech, and we've talked about this as well, the hate speech exception to the First Amendment, which does not exist. But this is something that you have predicted is going to continue to become an issue within American jurisprudence. Is this sort of...
It is an issue. Yeah, no, we have courts actively experimenting with how to create a hate speech exception to the First Amendment.
And I'm reminded of all of that in this context, which is how hypocritical of Harvard, which in Ms. Stefanik talks in this clip in particular about the surveys and reports that have been generated showing that Harvard is at the bottom of the list in terms of its protection of the First Amendment and its response to issues of rising cases of anti-Semitism and discrimination on campus, which are totally discarded for obvious reasons by President Gay. But this is what is really, really, I guess, it lights me up, Norm, is that these universities have made it a point that they don't give a damn about the First Amendment until it is convenient for them to claim some sort of mantle of free expression. And in this case, that's what's happening, is this chameleon of this sort of cultural woke Marxism that is embodied within the institution of Harvard and other elite universities. The business of education is not to deliver the tools for an education. It is to protect this environment, this bubble, so that all the money can be absorbed and everybody feels safe, right? And cater to the cultural, whatever the cultural movement is of the day. And in this instance, it's really convenient for Harvard to take up the mantle of the First Amendment of free expression, right? When they're under scrutiny for not enforcing the student conduct policy. But as other senators and other Congress people have brought up in these hearings, there are just a litany of cases where Harvard has dismissed professors. They have rejected and rescinded applications for becoming part of the student body, for people sharing memes, for professors expressing various opinions on what the bare minimum biological nature and anatomy of man and woman. There's this strange affinity for not endorsing free expression and free thought and the pursuit of ideas, except when they're on a hot mic and under the microscope of saying, hey, we haven't done a damn thing to mitigate against what is an obvious violation of our student conduct policy. Wait, it's the First Amendment, right? Isn't that still a thing? It's the First Amendment, First Amendment thing, right? Anyway, in rant.
Well, that's a good rant, and let's keep an eye on what happens at Harvard. Not that, because it is a leading institution, and ideas that percolate in the general culture pop up there first, typically. And what we see is a tolerance for hatred, as long as it's hatred of the right person. If you hate the wrong person, you're in trouble. And that's not a content neutral application of the First Amendment. While we're on the topic of people in over their skis, you know, I practice law in New Haven, live not far out of the city when I'm in Connecticut. And frankly, you know a little bit about the Board of Aldermen in New Haven, just by virtue of being here. Let me say the following. This is a group of idiots. And, you know, self-governance is a good thing. But if you're going to be governed by people with a collective IQ that would, you know, of about 93, don't expect better than average governance. The New Haven Board of Aldermen is considering a proposal to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. Hey, you know, really? How about cleaning the streets here? How about addressing the problem of homelessness? How about addressing the problem of crime in downtown New Haven? How about addressing the fact that we have a declining infrastructure and tax base? Wake up, people. Don't grab at the low-hanging fruit because you can. Nobody gives a damn what you think, New Haven aldermen, about what's going on in Gaza.
Surprise, surprise, a Yale law student submitted the resolution.
And there's another, you know, person in, I mean, hey, then Chloe Miller, you know, employers keep note. Chloe Miller, a Yale law student, thinks that municipal bodies should be issuing foreign policy directives. Chloe, there might be a job for you at Harvard attending President Gay's lectures, or perhaps advising President Gay on how to evade questions. What's going on in the Middle East is complicated. It's difficult. I've taken a strong stand. I'm not sure if Mike is sometimes discomfited or uncomfortable with my position, but my view is Hamas are a group of terrorists, and Israel has every right to fight back, and to fight back hard. I think in terms of a ceasefire, world peace is obviously a good thing. There is no quick fix or quick and easy solution to the tensions in the Middle East, and there hasn't been for more than a century. But driving the Jews into the sea is not a strategic option that is on the plate of options I will consider. I will fight back on behalf of the Jewish people each and every chance I get. You know, I had I was ranting on this on X the other day, and somebody sent me a note, Norm, are you Jewish? And I was just so irritated by that. It's none of your damn business whether I'm Jewish or not. And what does it have? And if I am, lucky me. And if I'm not, and I'm not, oh, well, I wish I were. I mean, it's a proud heritage. And, you know, and it can't be, you know, let me take a moment to play semi-theologian. Here we are in the world. I mean, how did it happen? Well, mom and dad had a thing going on, and one night they lit a spark, and look what tumbled out of the womb 9 months later, you. And here you are, in the world, a world you didn't choose, a world you didn't make. And the task of growing up is coming to terms with that world, learning to survive in it, learning to care for yourself and others. And in that regard, we come to terms with one another and ourselves in an ongoing act of self-exploration, of discovery, of communal working together. And we do so in large groups of people with ideas. And we do so in large groups over extended periods of time with civilizations. And we tell stories, and we understand things about ourselves. And one of the great gifts of Judaism to Western civilization has been the creation story, the story of Genesis, that in the beginning God created the world, and because it was good. And he created us in his own image, man and woman. And, you know, you can say, oh, that's quaint, that's this, it's infantile. You know, realistically, we don't know where it all came from, and we can't know, and therefore we have to be agnostic in the face of life's larger questions. And then it follows, because you can't help but wonder, what's the purpose of it all? Why are we here? Where are we going? How should I live? These are classic questions that every honest person struggles with daily. And Judaism, the Judeo-Christian tradition, gives an answer. Why are we here? We are created in the image of God. Where are we headed? Into right. We have choices to make. They involve righteousness. They involve acceptance of grace and mercy. And the creation myth is a wonderful story. You know, if you, as a matter of faith, if you accept it, it gives you an account of your place in the universe that has moral coherence and content. contrast that to the view being taught at some universities. In infinite space and infinite time, everything that we can imagine becomes not just possible, but probable. Therefore, if you can imagine that we are products of a video game being played in an unseen universe, and that we are avatars by bored teenagers in this universe, that might be an adequate account. And it's probably true given infinity. This is taught as a possibility that we should seriously consider while creation, while the notion that we're created in God's image, while the notion that there is a religious destiny to humankind is ridiculed as some sort of archaic artifact. Make a choice. Would you rather be created in the image of God and be taught within a tradition that gives canons of righteousness and that has been battle and time tested over millennia? Or would you rather be an avatar in somebody's video game? And if you're that avatar, then just choose, be whatever you want and blame it on the avatar. I can't help the fact that I like paper clips popping out of my face, and I might change my gender every week like I change my shirts. This is me, and I'm free to be me. And you can dissolve a civilization easily with those choices. So, I just view this reaction of the New Haven Board of Aldermen, needing to speak out on Gaza as another misapplication of this extreme expressive individualism that has led us to become sort of a mockery of the creative enterprise itself. If we're free to be whatever we want to be, and everybody has to respect everybody else's decision to be what everybody else wants to be, that becomes tolerance of everything, which becomes acceptance of anything. And the result is we can't draw lines between better and worse. And we've got New Haven aldermen who should be worrying about what the appropriate meter rate is on the parking meters on the green, trying to dictate foreign policy because, it feels good. Get a life, people, or better yet, go work for President Gay at Harvard.
True that. And Norm, I'm not uncomfortable with your opinions. They're your opinions. Why would I be uncomfortable?
Because I'm an ass,
Well, no, but again, I think just to be clear about where I'm sitting, I'm looking at the youth of America, right? Where we are going, and based on this sort of litmus test that is modern academia. Look at the age of those in this photo, right? At the alderman meeting. These are young people. They take themselves seriously. Whether we agree that they are serious is irrelevant to that determination. And I am curious as to this fracture on the political left. It does seem that this is sort of an existential crisis for the modern Democrat Party now that this split and this fracture has occurred. But I am concerned with, and this is maybe an easy transition to this piece in The American Mind by Brian Kennedy, what it is that we're seeing by and through our sort of internet use and social media that is cultivating this environment of division and importing geopolitical tensions to our college campuses. It's sort of it's an interesting sort of metastasization that I'm not familiar with, but seems to be accelerating at a rate and manifesting in real life in a way that this country is not used to. I mean, I'm aware of the late 60s and the turmoil in municipal regions of the country behind the civil rights movement. But this is years after, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Act, and this discord and sort of militarization of these fractured groups. It seems like we're reliving that moment in the late 60s, early 70s without putting a finger and pointing and saying that is indeed the case. But it is certainly a different model of that sort of on the ground warfare, sort of that mimetic warfare. And that is deeply troubling to me because it doesn't seem to have any logical physical limits in our society, Norm, because of how quickly things can become hot via social media and these viral moments.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It's a problem that you focus on, and I listen to you, and then I try to reconceptualize the world as it comes at me. And you're onto something. I don't have my head around it. I don't also have my head around this notion that this is an invasion rather than a transient sort of migration crisis. I hear people saying that the immigration is an invasion, that this is warfare. And I haven't read the Kennedy piece yet. I mean, I know, Mike, you did this morning. I haven't had a chance to get at it, and I'll defer to you in a moment. But here's the question I have. War is something that's, typically engaged in by states. Invasions are you typically engaged in by one group that may or may not be organized of another. And so this rhetoric that the migration crisis that we're enduring right now is warfare or an invasion is imposing military metaphors on mass movements of people. And I'm uncomfortable with the fit. I think that it's one thing to say that the wave of migrations caused by whatever cause, and there are those who say that it's a product of economic dislocation due to changing climate, as among other reasons. We had Rex Paris on, the mayor of Lancaster, California, who talked about that. We had him on more than a year ago, I believe. Maybe we should have him back. But I'm not persuaded by the rhetoric, and it seems to me more a projection of our fear of being overwhelmed by strangers, our fear of the other, than it does a realistic appraisal that some organized force is seeking to do this, because the warfare metaphor implies the action of a state. And if it's not a state, then who is it? And what's the war? And who's directing it? Who is our opponent? How do we win the war?
Yeah, this piece in the American Mind, I think, will help complete what your question is asking. I guess, immigration in and of itself is not the antithesis to our founding ideals. I think we can agree there. We can also observe that the pattern of immigration right now is not historically what has been the norm or what has been acceptable to a nation with America's ideals. But what Brian Kennedy does in this piece is establish that there's a pattern of immigration from a coalition of countries that share the same sort of goal of subversion of the West's dominance.
And what coalition of countries does Kennedy refer to?
Well, in particular, China leading the charge, right?
Mm.
And to support that, he notes that there in at least 100,000 young Chinese men that have immigrated into America in the last couple of years. And what he is essentially saying is, and it takes a few more steps to build that logical chain, but what this really strikes me as is a mechanism by which a war can become hot in territorial America. That is, with the advent of social media and with the fracture of information and then the virality of the messaging and the algorithmic push, that people who hold a value set that is contrary to the ideals of America may be activated in a kinetic way, in a hot war manner, and they are essentially laying in wait. And we are, as Americans of however many generations, sitting around inviting the enemy right into our neighborhoods, across our borders, with under the guise of what you were saying, that immigration in and of itself, right? It doesn't do enough. It's an invasion. However, that at some point in the future, that some chain of events would unlock a hot war and turn America into a war zone.
So I've wondered about that from time to time. I mean, for example, it is difficult for me to understand immigration or migration to the United States from China. China's a totalitarian society. You just don't get to say to the chairman, "I'm leaving. I think I'll go to New York where they have better hot dogs." You leave with state approval. The assets you can take are limited, and so you get the impression that if there is a mass migration of individuals from China to the West, it's with state approval. And I have from time to time had the following paranoid thought. Whether it's just a reflection of a weakness on my part, which generally is what paranoia is, connecting dots that are not otherwise connected, or whether it reflects a larger reality, I can't say. But you see these reports of explosions at food plants, at production facilities, at refineries, seemingly at randomly occurring throughout the country, and they seem to have come in waves. And I've wondered from time to time whether these aren't the results of sabotage or saboteurs in our midst, designed to undermine the economy's effectiveness. I have no evidence to support it, but the fact that I wonder it either reflects poorly on me or is an intimation that there is something going on in the wider world.
Are you there,
Mike? Yeah, can you hear me? Does
Absolutely.
Kennedy Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, as you know, technical difficulties are our brand. Thank you, Chairman Xi, for that moment and reminding us of the vulnerabilities of what ties, the ties that bind us as a people. I mean, does Kennedy, I've wondered whether there are these waves of explosions we have at granaries, at food production facilities, oil refineries, and production companies. I'm wondering, there always seems to be a report every couple days in the press about a massive fire somewhere. Has anybody ever really studied whether these are random events or whether these are the results of saboteurs?
I think about the 5 there in Southern California and that massive homeless encampment that went up in flames and was so hot and burned so quickly that it destroyed that bridge that needed to be rebuilt, right? And I think I forget it was a wild percentage of traffic in and out of Southern California goes over that overpass every single day. And I have the same thoughts. I think that we've been looking at various farm fires, facility fires, warehouse fires. You go back to what went on in New Palestine with the train wreck. There seems to be a pattern that is being at least publicized now. I can say that,
Is it a pattern? I mean, that's the question. Are these random events that are occurring because of the complexity of our society?
We are being conditioned in one of 2 ways, or maybe both. It doesn't have to be an either or, but it's certainly conditioning of some type and variety. And the conditioning is such that it is sort of a demoralization at bottom, right? Regardless of what we would attribute to the cause of all of that, there is a broad and overarching theme of demoralization of the American population. I want to read from the article, this paragraph at the top of the screen, give you a better idea, Norm, of what I was describing. Quote, by some estimates, almost 100,000 military-aged Chinese men have entered the country. And even if the vast majority of other illegal immigrants were from Central and South America, it would be more than certain that roughly 1 million of these come from the Islamic world, including Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the like. If, as it appears, we are at war with a global force led by Communist China in concert with the elements of the Islamic world, we can expect that included in that million would be members of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iranian IRGC forces. Taken together, they make up a deadly guerrilla army poised to tear American society apart. If we think this is not possible, we are deeply delusional.
So I do agree it's possible, and obviously it's possible. Is it likely? And is there evidence? I mean, is there evidence to suggest that this is an organized effort, or is it a xenophobic demonization of the other? And honestly, Mike, I can't tell. And I want to be careful to avoid scapegoating because it's just not a responsible reaction to chaos.
I don't want to think in that direction, because in order to think in that direction, it is mutually exclusive of a life where individuals in our respective positions, Norm, with families and businesses, and a reliance on our society and economy going in the direction that it is. It represents a stark contrast. That future that comes on the other side of making that conclusion is really troubling and represents a stark contrast to our lived reality. I think the Occam's razor explanation would be something to the tune of what we're seeing in Chicago, with residents pushing back on the politicians who are okay with importing tens and thousands of migrants into that city and then putting those migrants on the public dole. And what I would suggest is that really represents a new demographic of voters for the Democrat Party. Is, in essence, rather than looking at this piece in the American mind and saying this is definitely it, I certainly acknowledge that it is possible. And like you, I'm curious. And these are things that one thinks about to the logical extreme. I also think that perhaps the simpler explanation is that the economy has changed based on the last several years. I think I mentioned how much of the currency has been created, how much of our global currency has been created in the last several years, and what that portends for the size and growth of the economy, and then what that requires in the form of human capital, right? Units, taxable units, right? And voters, et cetera. And it seems like the one thing that has not been said from anywhere is that the size of the American economy and the Western economy has changed by inflating the currency to a certain degree. And because of that, our our base, right, our physical world must accommodate that growth, because otherwise that economy is too big for the size of our population, and therefore we are importing more people in order to ensure that that is stabilized. I think that that's a rational explanation.
Well, there has to be one, and it strikes me that the immigration crisis is real, and I think that we need obviously to focus on it. I want to thank you for bringing pieces from the American mind to our attention. You've done so several times in recent days, and maybe folks, we need to get back into the habit of long forming and bringing in people with expertise in this area, because I'm persuaded that population migration trends are a driving force in history, and that we are not fully awake or aware of what is happening to us, and therefore we're not making intelligent decisions about how best to protect our way of life. In part, it's because we're afraid to admit we have one. That might offend someone, but I think critical questions to ask. I'm always puzzled by the fact that we've got many Islamic people coming to the United States for a better world. I'm not aware of anybody leaving the West to go to a Muslim country. If we've got 100,000 military-age men coming from China without their families, and a rapidly growing Chinese economy, then it is an interesting question. Why are they here? Why are they here? Why are we permitting them? Why do we want them? And are closed borders necessarily inconsistent with the American ideal? I don't have answers to these questions. I'm uncomfortable even raising them, but I think the point of being uncomfortable raising them is that they reflect the uneasiness and uncertainty and fault lines in our country and our society and our way of life, and that if we don't address them, they'll be addressed for us. And I think we need to find a critical perspective and a critical edge, and so we'll do so.
Just to bring it together a little bit, I'm seeing in the Rumble chat, We Hear Well says, has anyone ever heard of Atlas Shrugged? And it's a perfect reference to the modern moment. I think that how I would tie all of this together is if we juxtapose what we started with the state of modern academia in America and the West, and the product that modern academia is putting into our society and the lack of quality thereof, right? We would agree on that. And then we simultaneously turn our focus to the unbridled immigration and the migrant crises that are happening all over the country. And then we look at the sort of overall lack of institutional legitimacy of our federal executive offices and administrative agencies, and an apparent inability or unwillingness to combat these problems in a logical and orderly manner. It does feel very much like all of what we're talking about is tied together into a sort of overall campaign of demoralization, right?
Well,
I don't know by whom. It doesn't have to be a singular source. What we saw through COVID is that there are plenty of opportunistic actors in positions all over our country that took that opportunity to seize power of their own. It makes perfect sense to scale that to the world, a world that has lived in the image that the United States has created over the last 50, 60, 70 years in terms of global commerce, the economy, etc., trade. We have outsourced all of our manufacturing. All of our legitimate manufacturing has been outsourced to other countries. We're not building the railroads. We're not building new factories en masse. We're not solving some sort of critical infrastructural problem that we would need millions of military-aged males, as it were, to solve. The question is, what is the purpose then of having an unbridled immigration policy? Because those two things, Norm, are sort of polar opposites of what you described. A closed border does not make, that's not the same thing as saying like that's the fix to unbridled immigration. It's just there isn't any sort of reasonable accommodation of domestic interests in vetting and enforcing existing law on the topic, right? And so those together, it's like, well, do we even have a future society of young people that are equipped and competent to combat the problems that are the natural corollaries and the natural consequence of these really ignorant decisions? And I think the answer right now looks like no. Right?
Not so much, yeah. No, I hear you. Well, this is the sort of conversation that makes my head explode and makes me feel altogether ill-equipped to even recognize the problems of the modern world, which means we need to stay on these discussions and keep having them and contribute your input, folks, because we're all learning together to live in this brave new world, to drop the title of another novel. Hey, so if you happen to be in Connecticut tomorrow night and you've got nothing to do, head to the Mohegan Sun Casino in Norwich. I'll be on stage around 10 o'clock or so doing a little bit of stand-up comedy. And I'll soon report on my whereabouts in late February, early March. I'll be returning to LA to play with stand-up a little bit more. Can't say that I expect a world of success in this venture, but I can say that life is an adventure, and exploring a new avenue of expression is fun. And it's always good to laugh. If you can't shed a humorous light on the world we share in common, don't shed any light at all, I sometimes feel like saying. So
here's the poster there. What they call it, Comics Roadhouse at Mohegan Sun, 10 p.m. Tomorrow night, Thursday. So Norm is going to, I guess you're going to call Thursday Night Football, and then you'll go on stage. Do you have any idea what the order is?
I don't. So in the economy of stand-up comedy, so I'm learning. I'm trying to break in, and so here's what I understand. At the low end, there are open mic nights, and that is you go to a facility and they create a list, and if you get yourself on the list, you can go and perform. And I've cleared that hurdle. I know how to do open mic nights, and I'm at the second tier. I now get invitations to go places and have a brief bit under the supervision of more senior comics. That would be Frank Mergallo and Pat Oakes tomorrow night at Mohegan. Hopefully I'll evolve to a point where I might be able to host other aspiring comics. And then you try to, what's that?
A headliner. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's something like that. I mean, I'm not there. I mean, I'm stubbing my toes. I'm making mistakes, but you know what? I'm having fun, and being alive is having fun. So come on out to Mohegan Sun tomorrow night. We'll have a good time, I promise. And you've heard some of the material already here. Hopefully, I'll deliver it. I'll deliver it well. Mike and I are engaged in some flirtation with CPAC. It's possible one or the other of us might have an invitation to come out there and talk in January. Hasn't happened yet, but if you know anybody out there, give them a nudge. I'd like to talk about what's going on in this country. I'd like to talk about what I learned representing Alex Jones, what I learned representing the Proud Boys. It's not what you think. It's not about the canaries. It's about the coal mine. And I think the Republican Party needs to focus on the coal mine if they want to hoard the support of voters. It can be done.
Indeed, it can. Well, Norm, with that, we're going to end the stream. Nice to see some familiar faces in the chat. We hear well. Nice to see you. Critical Thought, Lawyer Will, and Pete Atkinson both made an appearance today. Norm, can you believe that?
Repeat? Yeah. We've been graced. And, Lawyer Will, I'm still, you kicked my ass so hard on Fantasy Football Monday night that I now have not just the vertical crack, I've got a horizontal one too. I'm sitting on hot cross buns. That's how badly you beat my team. But, Lawyer Will, I did check the standings this morning. Who's in the playoffs? Me. Who's looking to get in the playoffs? You. Deal with it. See you tomorrow, folks.
Yeah, Dawn and T-Girl wanted to acknowledge the two of you as well, so as not to feel overlooked. Always appreciate seeing your names pop up. MDMA for PTSD. Have a great day as well. Lawyer Will, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to take that last playoff spot, my guy. Anyway, Norm, see you tomorrow.
Ciao.